She was a black aerospace engineer, brilliant, resilient, and far too familiar with being mistaken for the assistant in rooms she led. She knew the looks, the doubts, the questions no one said out loud. But that day, in a snowbound airport, she was the only one who stepped forward to help a man in a wheelchair. She didn't know he was the heir to a billion-dollar tech empire, a man carrying both a quiet rage and a secret powerful enough to bring down his entire family. It started with a stuck wheel and a silver necklace. She thought it was just a kind gesture, but within 48 hours she would uncover the truth about the man she once loved. A corporation that lived above the law, and a lie that had buried her own family for years. A story about trust, betrayal, and the courage to speak the truth, even when the truth could cost you everything. Have you ever helped a stranger? And if you have, would you be willing to pay the price for it? The terminal buzzed with tired bodies and irritated voices, every movement laced with the tension of delays. Outside the tall windows, snow fell in slow, heavy sheets, turning the runways into endless stretches of white silence. Chicago O'Hare, already a beast of steel and echo, now felt like a holding cell. Marilyn Davis adjusted the strap of her duffel bag and kept walking. Every sound, the wheels of her carry-on, the clipped heels on linoleum, the muffled airport announcements, echoed inside her like a drumbeat she couldn't slow. She glanced. The board above Gate C-12. Flight 804 to San Francisco, delayed. Weather conditions, again. She breathed out through her nose. Not frustration. Focus. The delay gave her time to think, time to prepare for tomorrow's pitch. Investors didn't care about the weather. They cared about results, and she had every intention of delivering. The overhead lights hummed softly as she made her way to the far end of the waiting area, scanning for a spot with fewer people and a power outlet. That's when she saw him. A man in a charcoal coat sat near the window, his wheelchair parked carefully between two mismatched chairs. His posture was upright, back straight, chin lifted, but his eyes gave him away. Cold, sharp, watching, everything yet closed off. His fingers curled loosely over the armrests. When Marilyn's gaze dropped to the worn rubber grips on the wheels and the subtle tremor in his left hand, instinct took over. She moved toward him, not with pity, but with purpose. "Need a hand?" she asked, stopping beside him. Her voice was level, firm. The man looked up, clearly not expecting anyone to speak to him directly. A pause stretched between them, tense, curious. Then he nodded, expression unreadable. "The left wheel keeps catching," he muttered. "This floor hates me." Marilyn knelt, fingers brushing cold metal, inspecting the wheel as she spoke. "Looks like the axle's misaligned. Might be jammed with debris." "You're an engineer?" he asked. "Kinda, aerospace. I fix drones, not chairs, but mechanics are mechanics." He tilted his head, eyebrows lifting. "Smart and efficient." "I try." She stood, brushing off her hands. "Push forward while I steady it." The moment passed in a shared rhythm, his strength, her direction. The chair shifted, straightened. He let out a breath he'd been holding. "Thanks," he said, offering. "A hand. Brian Miller." Marilyn hesitated, then took it. "Marilyn Davis." There was a flicker in his eyes when she said her name. Just a beat too long. Then it was gone. He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "You look like you could use a break, too." Marilyn hesitated. She rarely sat with strangers. But something in his voice, equal parts exhaustion and openness, nudged her toward the seat. The view from the window was a blur of snow and runway lights, hazy and surreal. For a moment, they didn't speak. Then he glanced at the delicate silver chain around her neck, the pendant resting against her collarbone. "That's an unusual piece," he said slowly. "Looks old." "It was a gift," she said. Her tone made it clear she wouldn't elaborate. Still, he pressed gently. "From someone important?" Marilyn turned her head, meeting his eyes. They were blue, steady, too steady, the kind of gaze that looked for weaknesses. Yes, she said, but he's gone. Brian nodded once, then looked away. Silence fell again, but it wasn't empty. It thrummed with questions neither dared to ask. From the corner of her eye, Marilyn noticed a man across the hall glance at her. Then again, his eyes lingered on her skin, her posture, her clothes. He wasn't subtle. She'd seen the look before, doubt mixed with something uglier. As if her presence here, her confidence, demanded an explanation. Brian caught the look too. That guy has a problem, he muttered, barely moving his lips. Marilyn didn't respond. She was used to it. Ignore it, she said. I do, but you shouldn't have to. The simplicity of the statement caught her off guard. She gave a short nod, then opened her laptop. A few seconds later, a browser window loaded, revealing a 3D render of her prototype drone system. Brian leaned slightly closer. That's yours? Built it from scratch, she said. My firm's pitching it to a panel tomorrow. If they fund it, we can expand into wildfire support and urban rescues. He stared at the screen, then at her. You built that and you're sitting in a terminal like this? She smirked. The world doesn't hand out respect just because you're competent, especially not to women like me. Brian was quiet. The weight of her words hung in the air, sharp and true. Would you mind if I asked what women like me means to you? He said. Marilyn closed the laptop with a soft click. It means I walk into rooms where people assume I'm the assistant, not the creator. It means security pulls me aside more than others. It means I've learned to keep my voice even and my back straight, because one misstep becomes a stereotype. Brian didn't interrupt, didn't blink. When she stopped speaking, he said quietly, That's not right. No, she agreed. But it's real. Outside, a gust of wind battered the glass. A loudspeaker crackled overhead. Another delay. Brian looked at the storm, then at her. If you ever need an investor, someone who doesn't underestimate you, I know people. Marilyn raised an eyebrow. And why would you help me? His gaze didn't waver. Maybe because someone once helped me when I didn't deserve it. Something in his voice had shifted, like a door halfway open. She couldn't see inside yet, but she sensed it. Grief or guilt or maybe both. Marilyn stood, appreciated. But I don't need saving. I didn't say you did. They held each other's gaze for a second too long. Then she nodded and walked off toward the vending machines. Brian stayed behind, watching the silver pendant glint once under the fluorescent lights. It was Richard's. He would have known it anywhere. But he said nothing. Not yet. The wind howled through the glass like a wounded animal, rattling against the panes as if trying to claw its way inside. Snow kept falling, fast and thick now, turning the airport outside into a whitewashed void. Inside, the terminal hummed under artificial lights. It should have felt safe, but nothing about this moment felt calm. Marilyn returned to her seat with a lukewarm bottle of water and the hollow certainty that Brian Miller knew more than he'd let on. There had been something in the way his eyes locked onto her necklace. Recognition. Pain. She didn't miss details like that. Not anymore. Survival had taught her to read people fast. Brian had turned slightly in his chair, staring out the window as if the storm outside might swallow him. She sat beside him, watching the side of his face sharp in profile. The moment held like a breath thin. You didn't ask who gave me the necklace, she said quietly. Brian didn't move. I figured you didn't want to talk about it. I don't, she replied, but you already know. Now he looked at her. Looked. His jaw flexed once before he answered. It belonged to Richard. Richard Miller. My brother. There it was. She'd known it was coming, and still it hit like a punch to the chest. The words closed the space between them with the force of a revelation too heavy to carry alone. I didn't know he had a brother, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor inside her. You're not the only one he kept things from. Brian's tone was sharp, bitter. We had different mothers, same father. He kept our lives, not compartmentalized. Marilyn nodded slowly. That sounds like him. For a moment they both looked away, each wrestling ghosts of a man who had mastered the art of distance. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, and let the words fall. We met 4 years ago at a fundraiser for aerospace education. I was there with my team. He was magnetic, smart, reserved, but when he focused on someone, he was all in. Brian gave a faint, bitter laugh. Yeah, that sounds like Richard too. Marilyn didn't smile. We were together for 3 years. He never mentioned you, not once. Brian didn't answer right away. Then he said, he probably thought he was protecting you. From what? From us, from all of it. Pause. Then he added, Richard didn't trust our family, not since Evelyn took over. The name twisted in Marilyn's chest. The CEO? Brian nodded. Our father died when I was 17. Evelyn married him late. He left the company to her, not to Richard and not to me. She's smart, powerful, and dangerous when cornered. Marilyn swallowed hard. Richard said very little. About his past. He kept it neat, clean, detached. I only realized something was wrong when he started withdrawing. He wouldn't tell me why, just said it was safer that way. Brian's hands tightened on the armrests of his chair. The year before he died, he told me he'd found something. He didn't say what, just that it was big. He said Evelyn was hiding things, contracts, payments, people. I thought he was being paranoid. Next thing I know, he's dead. Marilyn turned her head sharply. What did they say happened? Accidental overdose, Brian replied. But he never used. Not once. And he hated pills. She felt something cold slide into her stomach. I was told it was a heart attack. Sudden. No autopsy. They cremated him within 2 days. I didn't even get to say goodbye. Brian's expression hardened. That sounds like Evelyn's doing. Quick, quiet, controlled. Everything inside Marilyn tightened, old grief twisting into new suspicion. She looked down at the necklace resting against her chest. She hadn't taken it off since the day she got the call. It was the last thing he'd given her. The last thing that made sense. Brian's voice softened. He loved you, you should know that. She didn't answer. Love meant trust. And Richard had hidden too much. A loud clang echoed from across the terminal, an unattended cart tipping over. Marilyn flinched instinctively, her heart racing. When she turned, she caught a man near the corner of the lounge watching them. He turned away too quickly, pulling a phone to his ear. She caught a reflection in the glass, a shadow too still. You know what this looks like? He said under his breath. Like someone's watching. Marilyn leaned closer, her voice a whisper. You think Evelyn sent someone? I don't know. But if Richard left behind what I think he did, someone doesn't want you finding. Judith, her fingers brushed the chain at her neck. The pendant was simple, but she'd always thought it felt heavier than it should. Suddenly, the screen above flickered. Final call for Flight 804 to San Francisco. The moment broke. We should. Word, Brian said. Marilyn nodded, but her mind wasn't on the plane. It was on the chain around her neck, on the weight that might not just be symbolic anymore. As they made their way to the gate, Brian rolling beside her, Marilyn walking fast but controlled, she replayed every moment of her time with Richard. Every late-night conversation, every time he'd hesitated before answering a question, every half-smile that looked like it came with a warning. She had ignored the signs. She hadn't wanted to know. Now she did. They reached the gate. The attendant barely looked at them as she scanned their tickets. Brian was wheeled down the ramp first. Marilyn followed, her breath tight in her chest. Inside, the aircraft. The lights were low, the cabin half full. She took the window seat. Brian settled beside her. The door closed with a mechanical hiss, sealing them in. As the plane taxied toward the icy runway, Marilyn pressed her fingers to the pendant again. For the first time she wondered, had Richard known he wouldn't make it out? And if he did, had left something for her to find? The drone of the engine was steady, almost hypnotic, but Marilyn couldn't relax. Her fingers rested on the cool metal of the pendant around her neck. Brian sat beside her, silent. The dim light above them washed his face in pale shadow, softening. The edge in his jawline, but not the tension in his eyes. He hadn't spoken much since takeoff, and neither had she. Too many thoughts. Too much unsaid. Outside the window, the sky was thick with gray. Beneath them, a country neither of them trusted anymore slipped silently by. She shifted in her seat, pressing her spine against the cold backrest. Her thoughts returned, again, to Richard. Not the version with the careful words and the half-truths, but the man who held her like she was his anchor. She remembered the feel of his breath against her shoulder. His voice, soft, urgent. "I need to protect you." Protect her from what? Brian's voice cut through the fog. He kept the worlds separate, like chess pieces, no overlap. Marilyn turned to him slowly. "And what piece was I?" Brian's throat moved as he swallowed. I don't think even he knew. She let that sit. She was tired of asking for answers from ghosts. The plane touched down with a jolt. San Francisco greeted them with cold rain and a sky smeared in steel. As they moved through the terminal, Brian maneuvered ahead, his wheelchair gliding with practiced efficiency. Marilyn kept pace, her boots clicking against the polished floor. They stepped into the rideshare zone. A car pulled up, sleek, black, impersonal. The driver, a woman with clipped hair and tired eyes, didn't ask questions. She barely looked at them. As they slid into the back seat, Marilyn's phone buzzed. A name flashed across the screen, Kevin Davis. Her thumb hesitated, then tapped accept. "Hey," she said, voice low. Kevin didn't waste time. "You're here?" "Just landed." "Good. I filed the petition to reopen Dad's case. The state's not going to like it." "They never do." There was a pause. "You find anything?" Kevin asked. Marilyn looked at Brian, who was pretending not to listen. She didn't answer. "I'll tell you soon," she said. "Meet?" "Me at the hotel?" "Already there." She ended the call and stared out the rain-slicked window. Kevin was 23. Too young to carry the weight of a father in prison and a sister chasing shadows. But he did it anyway, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. He believed in justice the way kids believed in magic, desperately, stubbornly. At the hotel, Brian stayed behind in the lobby while Marilyn took the elevator alone. The hallway smelled of bleach and overused air freshener. The carpet was too clean, too quiet. Kevin opened the door before she knocked. He was barefoot, wearing a university hoodie, and holding a mug of coffee like it was armor. His expression flickered when he saw her. Relief, concern, anger, there and gone. "You look like hell," he said. She pushed past him. "Are you always this charming?" "When I haven't slept?" "Absolutely." She dropped her bag and turned to face him. "I need your help." And Dee didn't flinch. "Always." She reached up, unclasped the necklace, and held the pendant in her palm. "There's something inside this. Richard gave it to me before he died. I think he knew what would happen." Kevin took the pendant gently, turning it over in his hands. His fingers moved fast, efficient, scanning for seams, for weight distribution. "I need the drive read," Marilyn said. "Privately, securely. Not on public Wi-Fi, not anywhere they can trace." Kevin's eyes narrowed. "Who's they?" "Moore Tech, Evelyn Moore." He looked at her for a long second. Then he stepped aside, gesturing to his laptop on the desk. A firewall ran across the screen like a wall of glowing symbols. Not a hacker, he wasn't that stupid, but he knew systems, knew how to request federal files through the right channels, how to track public records buried under red tape. He connected the pendant to an adapter, slid it into the port, and waited. Marilyn stood behind him, breath tight. The screen blinked. A folder appeared. Kevin clicked. Inside. One video, time-stamped 11 days before Richard's death. Kevin hovered. "You ready?" Marilyn nodded. The screen came alive. Richard sat in a dark room, only his face lit. He looked tired, older. His voice was calm but frayed at the edges. "If you're watching this," he said, "then I'm dead." Marilyn's hand shot to her mouth. "I couldn't tell you everything," the recording continued. "They were watching, they always are. But I found it. Evelyn's contract with the DOD. It's not just fraud, it's surveillance. Illegal. Hidden in defense packages. Your father tried to stop it, they framed him, buried it. And they'll come for you too." The screen went black. No ending. Just silence. Marilyn stepped back like she'd been struck. Kevin stared, his mouth open. Jesus. She couldn't breathe. The room spun. She gripped the chair, forcing air into her lungs. "They set him up," she whispered. "They set Dad up." Kevin's voice was low. "This changes everything." A knock at the door. Both froze. Kevin stood slowly. Marilyn reached into her bag. She didn't own a weapon, but her hand found a heavy flashlight. Kevin opened the door. It was Brian. "I figured you'd want to talk," he said. Then he saw Marilyn's face. "You found something." She nodded. Brian entered, the tension following him like a storm cloud. Marilyn handed him the pendant. "She lied," she said. "Your stepmother framed my father, and Richard died trying to tell the truth." Brian stared at the device. His hands trembled. Marilyn's voice cut through the silence. "What are you going to do now?" Brian looked at her. His eyes were no longer distant, no longer careful. He was furious. "I'm going to finish what he started." The hotel room was silent, but Marilyn felt like the walls were listening. The air had shifted, denser now, heavier with knowing. She stared at the black screen where Richard's face had just vanished, the words still echoing in her chest. "They framed him, buried it, and they'll come for you too." Her hands were clenched, nails pressing into her palms. Pain made things real. Brian sat in the corner, elbows resting on the arms of his chair, gaze pinned to the floor like it might crack open and reveal a second truth. Kevin paced the room, his bare feet making soft thuds against the cheap carpet. The storm outside had followed them here, thunder rumbling in the distance, wind clawing at the windows. Marilyn turned away from the screen. "That video alone won't be enough." Kevin stopped. "It's a statement from a whistleblower tied to a government contractor. That holds weight. Not without evidence, not without names, dates, contracts." She rubbed her temple. "We need more than Richard's word." Brian looked up. "He mentioned the Department of Defense, hidden surveillance. Your father tried to stop it, and Evelyn shut him down, the only way she could. By labeling him a traitor." Kevin's voice was low, full of acid. "And now she's head of Mortec, still cashing checks off the back of that lie." The room felt too small. Marilyn walked to the window. Rain streaked down the glass in frantic rivers, blurring the streetlights below into smears of orange and white. Brian's voice came from behind her. "Richard kept backups, always. He didn't trust cloud storage. He had physical copies, maybe a safe house." Kevin raised an eyebrow. "You know where?" Brian shook his head. "No, but I know someone who might." Marilyn turned. "Who?" Brian hesitated. "Harrington, a former advisor of my father's. He left the company when Evelyn took control. Said she was poisoning the foundation. He might still be around." Kevin moved toward his laptop. Be a full name. Leon Harrington. He used to teach at Stanford before my father hired him full-time." Fingers flew across keys. In seconds, Kevin had a list. "He's still in the Bay Area. Registered as a consultant under a private LLC. Recent activity shows an address in Daly City." Marilyn crossed the room and looked over his shoulder. "That's not far. We can go first thing tomorrow." Brian's voice cut in, sharp. "We're going tonight." She turned, surprised. "It's almost midnight." "That hasn't stopped them," he said. "Whoever was watching us at the airport, if they're following us now, waiting is a mistake." Kevin spoke before she could. "We'll need to go separately, different cars, routes." Marilyn nodded. "You go with Brian, I'll take another ride. Meet at the address in 45 minutes." The room erupted into movement. Marilyn stuffed the pendant back into her bag, wrapping it in a cloth. Kevin pulled on a hoodie, zipped up his laptop, and slid a USB into his pocket. Brian rolled to the door, jaw tight. As they exited, the hallway was dim and quiet. No footsteps, no voices. But Marilyn couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Paranoia, maybe, or instinct. She caught her reflection in the elevator mirror, shoulders squared, eyes sharp. She didn't look scared. She looked ready. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist, but the air was colder, biting at her skin. She called for a second rideshare, giving a nearby bookstore as the drop-off. No patterns. No trails. The city blurred past the windows. Streetlights flickered on wet pavement. Neon signs glowed like warnings. She kept her hand on her bag the entire time, one eye on the mirror. But no one followed. Not yet. When she arrived, Brian and Kevin were already waiting outside a dark brick building wedged between two shuttered storefronts. A narrow stairwell led down to a basement entrance. Brian gestured silently, and they moved as one. The door creaked open after a sharp knock. Leon Harrington was older than Marilyn expected, late 60s maybe, with thinning white hair and skin weathered by stress more than age. His eyes, however, were alert, deep-set and glassy with suspicion. He scanned their face, then stepped aside. The inside of the apartment smelled like books and dust. Floor-to-ceiling shelves crowded the walls, stuffed with folders, binders, and old newspapers. There was no television, just an analog clock and a desk covered in maps and documents. He closed the door behind them. "You brought trouble with you." Brian rolled forward. "We need your help." "I retired from trouble. This is about Richard." That made Harrington pause. He stared at Brian a beat longer, then nodded toward the desk. "Sit. Talk." Kevin leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Marilyn stood by the shelves, scanning labels, classified budgets, military R&D, more tech internal memos. Brian explained everything. Richard's death, the pendant, the video. Harrington didn't interrupt. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "I warned him, told him not to push too hard. Evelyn doesn't lose." "She killed him," Marilyn said. Her voice didn't shake. "And she destroyed my father to do it." Harrington looked at her, then nodded slowly. "Thomas Davis, I remember. He flagged irregularities in the Havana contract, civilians being monitored through backdoor surveillance. We buried it after he was arrested. Evelyn erased the rest." "Not everything," Kevin said, pulling out the USB. "We have this, but we need more." Harrington considered them, then slowly walked to a locked cabinet. He entered a code, pulled out a weathered folder and a small black box. "This," he said, placing them on the table, "is what Richard gave me the night he disappeared. He told me to keep it off the grid." Marilyn stepped forward. Inside the folder, printed copies of contracts, falsified security memos, and one authorization letter signed by Evelyn Moore with terms that explicitly violated civilian privacy. Pause. In the black box, a second flash drive. Kevin plugged it into his laptop. New files. A full breakdown of the surveillance program, nicknamed Obsidian, targeting civilian populations under the guise of defense research. Code names, emails, transaction logs. Marilyn read the names. Senators, contractors, CEOs. "They built an empire," she whispered. Brian looked at Harrington. "Why didn't you come forward?" "With what, my word against hers?" He shook his head. "I needed proof, but Richard died before I could gather more." Kevin's voice was low. "Now we have it." But Harrington didn't look relieved. He stepped to the window, parted the blinds. Then he muttered, "Too late." Outside, a black SUV sat parked across the street. Engine running. Lights off. "They found us," he said. "We need to go, now." The alley behind Harrington's apartment reeked of rain, rust, and diesel. Marilyn's boots splashed through shallow puddles as they moved, fast and silent. Kevin carried the laptop clutched to his chest, knuckles white. Brian kept his hands steady on the wheels of his chair, moving through the uneven pavement without a word. Harrington locked the back door behind them, his face pale, his shoulders hunched low like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. The SUV across the street had stayed dark, but Marilyn didn't believe in coincidences anymore. They turned the corner and disappeared into the next block, ducking beneath the weak flicker of streetlights. Harrington led them through narrow back roads until they reached a low-slung building with a rusted sign that read, St. George's Storage 24-hour. Access. He punched in a code. The gate buzzed open. "We'll stay here for the night," he said, voice rough. "It's secure. No cameras. They won't track us through this." The interior of the unit was cold and metallic. Blank concrete floors, a few folding chairs, and a heater that coughed once and died. Marilyn leaned against the wall, eyes closed. Her mind was a firestorm of facts, faces, and betrayal. They had the evidence now, but not the safety, not the plan, not yet. Brian parked near the corner, breathing shallowly. His silence stretched until it snapped. "My father died thinking Richard hated him." Marilyn looked up. Brian's eyes were locked on the ground. "He didn't," she said. "He did." Brian's voice was sharp. "He saw Dad let Evelyn take over, saw him fold. I was 16 when Richard left. Said the family was poisoned. He walked out and never looked back." Marilyn stepped forward slowly. "He was scared, Brian. Not one of you, not your father, of what Evelyn was becoming." "I stayed," Brian snapped. "I fought for him, for the company, even when they shut me out." "You got hurt," she said. He looked up at her, eyes burning. "I got crippled." The word hung there, heavy, violent. Kevin shifted in the corner but said nothing. Harrington turned away. Brian exhaled sharply. 2 years ago I confronted Evelyn, said I wanted to audit Obsidian. She smiled. The next week I had a car accident, brakes cut. I woke up in the hospital unable to walk, and she was there, beside me, holding my hand like a savior. "She's ruthless," Marilyn said. "She cleans messes before they stain." Brian gave a bitter laugh, and Richard still thought I was part of it. Marilyn crouched beside him. "He didn't trust anyone anymore. That wasn't about you. It was survival." His shoulders dropped. "So why didn't he tell me what he found?" "Because he knew what you just learned the hard way. Trust gets people killed." Brian looked at her. "And yet he told you." Her throat tightened. "He didn't tell me everything, just enough to break me when he died." Kevin approached quietly. "We should talk next steps." Marilyn nodded. "We expose Obsidian. All of it." "We'll need more than files," Kevin said. "We need media, legal support, a leak strategy." Brian spoke again. "I know someone at The Guardian, old contact, war correspondent turned investigative." Harrington turned. "That's risky." Brian didn't blink. "So is doing nothing." Marilyn stood. Her fingers traced the edge of the table, cold steel under her skin. "Richard gave us this. Not just to bury Evelyn, but to clear my father's name." Kevin nodded. "I already scheduled a meeting with the legal aid office for tomorrow morning. We'll present the evidence there first. File a motion to reopen the case." The room fell into quiet again. Then Marilyn asked softly, "What was he like as a brother?" Brian leaned back, eyes distant. "Smart, distant, protective in ways that didn't always make sense. When I was 9, some kid in prep school called me a bastard. The next day, Richard showed up, said nothing, and broke the kid's nose. Then he got suspended. He never told anyone why, not even our dad." Marilyn smiled faintly. "That sounds like him." Brian stared ahead, and yet when it mattered, he said nothing. Marilyn's voice hardened. "No, he said everything. Just not to the people who already had power. He said it to me, because he knew I'd carry it." The silence that followed was different, less bitter, more certain, but certainty didn't last. The door rattled. Everyone froze. Harrington moved first, pulling open a small crate under the table. Inside, an old shotgun, wrapped in cloth. Kevin grabbed a crowbar. Marilyn reached for her flashlight again, gripping it tightly. The door opened slowly. A woman entered, early 30s. Blonde, soaking wet, hands raised. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," she said quickly. Brian's voice was ice. "Claire?" Marilyn blinked. "You know her?" "My ex-fiancée." Claire looked at Brian. "I'm not with them, I swear." Kevin stepped closer. "Them who?" She ignored him. Eyes locked on Brian. "I saw your name in the company logs, then it vanished. That only happens when Evelyn wipes someone off the grid. I came to find you." Brian didn't move. "Why?" "Because they're moving fast now. Obsidian is being transferred to a foreign contractor. Once it's out, the evidence you have won't matter." Marilyn's heart kicked. "How do you know?" "I still have contacts, and I stole something." From her jacket, Claire pulled a folded folder and placed it on the table. Inside, shipment schedules, offshore account data, emails between Evelyn and a contact listed only as C. Kevin read fast. "She's outsourcing the program, no oversight, no accountability." Claire looked around. "You have a window, maybe 48 hours. After that, your leverage disappears." Words stayed buried. Brian finally said, "Why help us?" Claire's answer was soft. "Because I stayed silent once, and it cost everything." Marilyn looked at the folder, then at Brian. The weight had shifted again, but so had the odds. They had one shot. Morning broke like a knife through fog. A low gray hung over the bay, slicing sunlight into dull slivers. From the cracked window of the storage unit, Marilyn watched the city stir. Below the surface of traffic and routine, something dark shifted, like the weight of truth preparing to surface. Her hands itched for motion. Her breath tasted like metal. She turned from the window. Claire sat cross-legged on the floor, hair still damp, flipping through the shipment files she'd brought. Kevin hunched over his laptop in the corner, fingers darting across the keyboard, the glow of code flashing in his glasses. Harrington leaned against a steel beam with a half-lit cigarette and a 1,000-yard stare. Brian was by the door, eyes fixed on the gap beneath it, one hand resting calmly on his knee, the other twitching just slightly. No one had slept. Claire broke the silence. "She'll move the data within the next 36 hours. The files I stole show encrypted communications with a third-party firm in Luxembourg. Once that's done, all domestic oversight is gone. Congress will never get it back. And the public will never know it existed," Marilyn said. Kevin didn't look up. "I'm tracking the route now. They're moving the servers out of Heir, the secondary Mortec facility, north of Redwood City." Marilyn rubbed the bridge of her nose. Her nerves were frayed, but sharp. "We'll need physical access. Get a copy of the entire archive before it disappears." "Impossible," Claire muttered. "The building's locked tighter than a vault." Marilyn looked at her. "So was Richard. And he still left us something." That shut Claire up. Brian spoke next. "I'll contact my source at The Guardian. If we get that data, they'll run it. Full coverage, exposé, legal review, whistleblower protection." "You sure they can be trusted?" Kevin asked. "They owe me," Brian said simply. "And they hate Evelyn more than I do." That was enough. They moved quickly. Harrington arranged transport, an unmarked van pulled from an old logistics contract. Kevin encrypted the USB copies and scheduled a dead man protocol. If he didn't check in every 3 hours, everything would be dumped online. Claire mapped the facility's floor plan from an outdated fire inspection file. Marilyn memorized, "No room for error." They left just after noon. The van smelled like gasoline and cold plastic. The city passed them in silence. Every traffic light felt like a countdown. Marilyn sat between Kevin and Brian, watching her reflection blur in the window. She looked calm. She was not. The Mortec data center loomed ahead, concrete, matty, black, expressionless. Security was minimal on the outside, that was the illusion. The real defenses lived inside. Retina scanners, pressure-sensitive floors, firewalls built like mazes. They parked 2 blocks away. Claire took the lead. She'd once been cleared for access, and while her credentials were now flagged, her knowledge of back doors gave them 10 minutes, no more. They moved fast. Inside a side alley, she tapped a bypass panel. The service door clicked open. "Once we're in, we split," she whispered. "Kevin and I will get to the control room. Marilyn and Brian head to the lower vault where the servers are housed. 5 floors down, no elevator access. You'll have to take the ramp." Brian gave a dry smile. "Figures." They slipped through like shadows. Each hallway smelled sterile and still. Lights buzzed overhead. Cameras blinked silently, unmoved. They reached the intersection. Claire nodded. Then she was gone. The ramp spiraled downward, the walls narrowing with every turn. Marilyn's breath grew tighter. The silence down here wasn't just oppressive, it was wrong. She felt watched, always. Halfway down, a voice pierced the static. "Well, I expected Evelyn to send someone, but I didn't think she'd send her brother." Brian froze. From the shadows stepped a man in a tailored suit. Sharp lines, steel-gray hair, calm menace in his eyes. He held no weapon. He didn't need to. Marilyn stepped forward, jaw set. "Who the hell are you?" He smiled faintly. "Porter, Evelyn's counsel. I manage her sensitive transitions." Brian's voice dropped. "You tried to kill me." Porter tilted his head. "I warned you. You didn't listen." Marilyn's hand inched toward the flashlight in her coat, not because she needed light, but because its metal weight felt like control. Porter's voice cooled. "You're standing in front of national security, Ms. Davis. The cost of leaking this is more than your father's reputation. It's lives, stability." Marilyn stepped closer. "You used that same excuse to bury an innocent man, to kill Richard." Porter's smile vanished. "Richard was weak," he said. "He thought sentiment was a shield." "No," Marilyn said. "He thought silence was complicity." Then she swung. The flashlight hit his shoulder, not his face. It knocked him off balance, but not down. Brian moved instantly, wheeling forward and jamming the corner of his chair into Porter's leg. The man dropped hard, gasping. "Go!" Brian barked. Marilyn didn't hesitate. They ran. The vault room was cold, lined with racks of servers humming in quiet violence. Marilyn scanned the system. 3 password-protected towers, each with dual authentication. Brian slid beside. "The terminal. I can override it. Give me 60 seconds. The screens lit up. Layers of code bled into each other, lines climbing and vanishing like ghosts. Marilyn watched the door. Each second ticked like a heartbeat. Outside, alarms blared. Brian growled. "Almost there." The terminal blinked. Access granted. He shoved the USB into the port. Files flooded in. Contracts, recordings, surveillance footage. Thousands of pages, names, routes, payments. Claire's intel was right. The entire Obsidian program was here, bleeding secrets from every crevice of power. Footsteps pounded above. 30 seconds, Brian said. The files crawled past 87%. Gunshots cracked the air. Marilyn's body jerked toward the sound. "Claire?" No answer. The bar hit 100%. Brian yanked the USB. "Move!" They bolted. Back through the tunnels, back past Porter, unconscious, back up the ramp as emergency lights flared red. Every shadow moved now. Every silence screamed. They burst out into the alley. Kevin and Claire were already there. Claire bleeding from a graze on her shoulder, Kevin pale but standing. Marilyn clutched the USB to her chest. She looked at Brian. No more silence. The room was too quiet for a house that large. The kind of silence that presses in, deliberate, cultivated, like every sound had been vacuum sealed. Marble floors gleamed beneath Marilyn's boots as she stepped across the threshold of Evelyn Moore's private estate. The chandelier above them pulsed like a heart of crystal, catching each flicker of light and shattering it into sharp diamonds. She didn't move, not even to blink. He wheeled forward beside her, his hands steady on the rims, eyes fixed ahead, as if walking into the lion's den was a daily occurrence. Claire followed close behind, her shoulder bandaged but jaw set. Kevin flanked Marilyn on the other side, carrying the encrypted USB drive like it was a detonator. The house was all steel and glass, cold elegance, pristine and lifeless, a mausoleum of power. Then came the sound, heels on stone, calm, controlled. Evelyn. Moore entered like a queen surveying subjects. Her black dress clung to her with surgical precision. Her hair, bone white, was sculpted into a perfect knot. She didn't smile. "You came," she said, voice smooth as poison. "I wasn't sure Brian still knew how to knock." Brian didn't. "Rise to it." "We brought something for you." Evelyn's gaze shifted to Marilyn. "And you must be the architect of this rebellion." Marilyn met her eyes. "No, just the one you failed to silence." A beat of stillness passed. Evelyn gestured to the long table in the center of the room, carved from a single piece of dark mahogany. "Shall we sit, or are you planning to make this dramatic?" "No more drama," Brian said. "Just truth." They took their seats. Marilyn sat directly across from Evelyn. Every inch of wood between them felt like a battlefield. "You've made quite the mess," Evelyn began, crossing her legs with practiced grace, breaking into federal contracted facilities, assaulting private security, stealing proprietary data. Kevin leaned forward. "Illegal surveillance of civilians, falsified defense contracts, false imprisonment of a whistleblower. Want me to keep going?" Her eyes turned toward him, cold and calculating. Ah, the boy with the lawyer. Dreams. Still clinging to the fantasy that truth means something? "It does now," Marilyn said. She slid a small recorder onto the table, followed by the drive. "We have the full archive, Obsidian, signed contracts, payments, video footage, audio, all traceable to you." Evelyn glanced at the items with the detached interest of someone inspecting insects under glass. Then she leaned back. "And what exactly do you want?" Marilyn narrowed her eyes. "Justice," Evelyn smiled. "Don't be naive." "I'm not. I'm angry." Marilyn's voice was clear, sharp, and unshaken. "You destroyed my father's life. You buried his name under a lie to protect a project you knew was criminal. You killed Richard when he tried to expose you. You tried to kill Brian. You think this ends with a payout or a warning?" "It ends," Evelyn said, her tone cooling. "When I say it does." Brian leaned forward, his voice like steel. "Not anymore." Evelyn's face cracked, just slightly, a shift around her eyes, a calculation misfiring. Marilyn pressed on. "You think you control everything, but you don't. Not me, not him, not the data. We've already made copies. Already sent them." "To whom?" Evelyn asked, the edge of challenge cutting into her words. Marilyn smiled for the first time. "To people who still believe in truth." Claire pulled a phone from her pocket. "One text and the full archive goes public. Congressional investigators, federal whistleblower networks, independent press. The Guardian has a full team ready." Evelyn stared at the phone like it was a loaded weapon. "Because it was." "You won't survive this," she said softly. Marilyn didn't blink. "I already have." The room went still. For a long moment no one moved. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls like it was listening. Then Evelyn rose slowly. Her heels clicked against the floor like countdowns. "I underestimated you," she said. "All of you, especially you, Marilyn." Marilyn stood too. "That was your first mistake." "No," Evelyn said. "My first mistake was thinking your father was the last Davis who mattered." Brian's chair creaked as he pushed back. "This is over." Evelyn turned to him. "Brian, you could have had everything, this company, this legacy. You chose her." "I chose to live with myself." Evelyn's voice darkened. "You won't walk away from this clean." "I don't need clean," he said. "I need the right." Claire stepped forward. "It's done. The files are out of your reach. You can't bury this." Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. Then she gave a slow, tight nod. "I suppose we all have our roles to play." She reached for a decanter at the sideboard, poured herself a drink with surgical calm. The liquid sparkled, amber and silent. "You'll win the media," she said. "You'll make your noise, but power doesn't die in headlines, it waits. It adapts." Marilyn stepped around the table, stood a breath away from her. "That may be true," she said, "but it remembers the first person who stood up and said no." She leaned closer, "And it starts here." Evelyn stared into her glass. Then, without another word, she walked out of the room. Not defeated, but wounded. And for the first time, uncertain. They didn't celebrate, there was no fist pump, no cheers, just silence. Real human silence. The kind that comes after a storm when the debris is still settling and the air smells of thunder and ash. Kevin finally broke it. "So, now what?" Marilyn turned to him, voice calm. "Now we finish it." They left the house without looking. Back the storm had passed, but the air still carried its scent. Wet asphalt, charged silence, the weight of things undone. Marilyn stood in the middle of a broadcast studio, surrounded by lights that burned too bright, and microphones that caught every breath. The digital countdown above the camera read 0.02, 13. 2 minutes until the interview went live. Across from her sat Caroline West, lead anchor for the Guardian's national stream. Poised, precise, eyes sharp as a scalpel. The kind of journalist who didn't just report the truth, she hunted it. "You're sure you want to do this live?" Caroline asked, adjusting her earpiece. "I'm sure," Marilyn said, her voice low but steady. Brian stood just off camera, arms crossed. He hadn't said much all morning, but his presence was grounding. Claire was upstairs, coordinating the legal team. Kevin was in another room with the federal agents, delivering backup evidence to the Department of Justice. It was finally moving. But this moment was hers. The director counted down. 5, 4, 3. The screen blinked to life. Caroline turned toward the camera. "Good evening. Tonight we bring you a story of corruption, cover-up, and courage. Our guest is aerospace engineer Marilyn Davis, who, along with her team, has uncovered a massive illegal surveillance operation buried inside government defense contracts. What you are about to hear will change the way you look at power, privacy, and accountability." The camera shifted to Marilyn. For a second, the weight of it all pressed on her chest. The lights, the eyes, the ghosts. Then she inhaled, slow and deep, and spoke. "My name is Marilyn Davis, and I'm here to tell the truth." She met the camera's gaze, steady, focused. She told them everything, about Richard, about Obsidian, about Evelyn Moore and the way she turned surveillance into profit and patriotism into a shield. She explained how her father was framed, how Richard was murdered, and how Brian was nearly killed for asking the wrong questions. She laid out names, dates, and contracts. They displayed documents across the screen in real time, redacted where necessary, but damning nonetheless. It was all there, the rot beneath the surface. Caroline listened with the gravity of a woman who understood impact. Her questions were sharp but never cruel. Marilyn answered everyone without blinking. At one point, Caroline leaned forward and asked, "Why didn't you walk away?" Marilyn didn't hesitate. "Because I've lived with silence. I know what it costs." There was a pause, heavy. Then the anchor nodded and turned to the camera. "We will continue our coverage throughout the week. Full digital access to all files will be released after federal review. We've confirmed with the Department of Justice that a formal investigation into Moore Tech has begun. Evelyn Moore has yet to issue a statement." The broadcast cut, and just like that it was out. The truth didn't explode. It didn't scream. It spread, like fire under the surface, quiet but impossible to stop. Within minutes, it trended. Within hours, it dominated headlines. Other networks picked it up. Anonymous sources came forward. A senator called for hearings. Protesters gathered outside Moore Tech headquarters with signs reading, "We are not targets," and "Free Thomas Davis." Back in the green room, Marilyn sat down, hands shaking. Brian knelt beside her. You did it. She looked at him, eyes rimmed red but unbroken. No, we did. Kevin entered a moment later, holding his phone. They're reopening Dad's case. Her heart stopped. What? The DOJ wants to vacate the conviction. They've already filed a motion to unseal the original court documents. We could get a full exoneration. Marilyn pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed. For so long, justice had been a dream, whispered behind locked doors. Now it was on paper. Real. Near. She stood and walked outside, needing air. The studio parking lot was still, the city buzzing faintly beyond. The sun was beginning to set, casting gold across the pavement. She leaned against a railing, trying to breathe. Brian joined her. For once, neither of them needed to speak. Not immediately. After a minute, he said, "Do you regret anything?" Marilyn stared at the horizon. "I regret not asking Richard more questions. I regret believing silence was love. But this? No. I don't regret standing." He nodded. "Neither do I." She turned to him. "What happens now? Evelyn won't just disappear." "No," he said. "But she won't control the narrative anymore. The press is digging, the feds are in. Her allies will fold before they burn with her." Marilyn's expression hardened. "She'll fight. Then we'll finish it." They stood together. In silence, the warmth of the sun touching their faces. It wasn't over, not yet. But the walls had cracked. The light was seeping in. Back inside, Claire rushed out of a side door, holding her phone. "She's issued a statement," she said. Breathless, Marilyn tensed. "What does it say?" Claire read from the screen. "Moortech is cooperating fully with federal authorities. At this time, we deny any wrongdoing. These are complex systems, and we are committed to national security." Brian scoffed. "She's spinning it." Kevin appeared behind them, his voice flat. "She'll throw everyone else under the bus first, including Porter. Probably even her own." Marilyn's hands clenched. "Let her burn," she said. "She buried my father. She erased Richard. She tried to silence all of us. But she doesn't. Get the last word." Claire looked at her. "You sure?" "Yes," Marilyn said, "because I'm still speaking." The wind shifted. The sun dipped low. For the first time in years, she didn't feel buried under someone else's silence. She wasn't a side note. She wasn't the collateral. She was the voice. And now everyone was listening. The courtroom was older than Marilyn expected. Tall windows streaked with dust, dark wood benches worn smooth by time and weight. The walls didn't gleam. They breathed. Every breath was steeped in years of judgment and silence. She sat in the front row, her back straight, fingers locked tightly in her lap. Beside her, Kevin bounced his knee once every few seconds, eyes fixed on the judge's bench. Across the day, till Brian sat with Claire, who leaned forward just slightly, as if trying to physically will the verdict into being. This was the day. The room buzzed softly with quiet voices, the scratch of paper, the hum of anticipation. A federal motion had been filed to vacate the conviction of Thomas Davis. The evidence they'd gathered, Richard's files, the signed memos, the server logs, had been authenticated. The prosecutor wasn't even fighting it. But none of that stopped Marilyn's hands from trembling as the door behind the bench opened. A judge entered, stern and slow, robe swaying with purpose. She took her seat and glanced at the small crowd. Her voice was clear. "We are here for the motion to vacate the 2009 conviction of Mr. Thomas Davis." Marilyn held her breath. The judge reviewed the paperwork, each page turned with deliberate slowness. It felt like hours. Then she looked up, met the room with eyes that had seen too much. "There is compelling and incontrovertible new evidence, suppressed at the time of trial, that undermines the credibility of the original prosecution. This court hereby vacates the conviction of Thomas Davis." Marilyn exhaled, not like she was letting go of breath, but like she was releasing years of buried grief. Kevin's hand closed over hers. Brian reached forward and squeezed her shoulder. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and she let it fall. It wasn't sadness. It was a door opening. Later, Outside the courthouse, a modest crowd had gathered. Supporters, journalists, strangers holding handmade signs. Truth matters and justice for Davis. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. But Marilyn didn't answer any of them. She walked straight down the steps, past the reporters, past the microphones, until she reached the sidewalk. And there, waiting with quiet dignity, stood Thomas Davis. Time had carved lines deeper into his face, and prison had taken color from his beard. But his eyes were the same, bright, unyielding, focused like they always had been. He didn't speak at first, he just looked at her, as if afraid the moment would vanish if he blinked. Marilyn stepped forward. She didn't speak either. She didn't need to. She wrapped her arms around him, and he held her like a lifeline, like an anchor returning to shore. When he pulled back, his voice was low. "You did it." "No," she whispered. "We did." Kevin stepped up, and Thomas embraced him too, whispering something neither she nor Brian could hear. But when Kevin turned around, he looked 10 years lighter. They walked away together. Not as victims of the past, but as proof that the past didn't get to write the last page. That evening they gathered in a small rooftop cafe overlooking the San Francisco skyline. The wind was crisp but not cold, the kind of air that woke you up rather than made you retreat. String lights hung low, warm and humming. Below, the city moved. Cars, lights, conversations. But up here, time felt suspended. Marilyn sat at a round table with Brian beside her, Claire across from them, and Kevin leaning against the balcony. Rail watching the skyline flicker. Glasses clinked softly. Laughter came slowly, like a muscle remembering how to move. Claire raised her glass. To the ones who spoke when it was hardest. They toasted, quietly, with weight. After a pause, Brian turned to Marilyn. "You could take this further, you know. A foundation, a reform bill, hell, a seat in Congress." She smiled, a rare kind that reached her eyes. "One step at a time." He nodded. "So, what's the first one?" She looked out at the city, then down at her hand, at the silver chain still wrapped around her fingers. The pendant glinted faintly in the light. "I want to build something that can't be buried," she said. "Not just for me, for others like my father, for Richard, for people who don't get second chances." Claire leaned forward. "You're thinking a non-profit?" "I'm thinking a movement," Marilyn said. "Public infrastructure, privacy, rights, government accountability, tech that serves people, not profits." Kevin turned around. "You'll need allies." "I already have them," she said, looking at each of them in turn. "And I'm not building this alone." The wind brushed past them, carrying the promise of something beginning, not ending. Brian watched her closely. "You believe it's possible?" "I believe silence ends the moment one person decides to speak." He smiled, slow and honest. "Then I'm with you." They stayed there long after the sun fell, long after the waitstaff began clearing dishes and yawning politely. No one rushed. No one needed to. When they finally rose to leave, Marilyn lingered at the edge of the rooftop. Below, headlights crawled like veins through the city. She could almost see the roads she hadn't walked yet. The fights are still ahead, but for the first time she wasn't afraid of them. She turned to Brian. "Walk with me?" He nodded. "Always." They moved slowly through the evening, her hand lightly resting on his shoulder, his wheels gliding beside her. There were no walls between them anymore, no compartments, just truth carried like a banner rather than a burden. She had faced down systems, shadows, and silence, and won. Not because she was louder, because she refused to be quiet. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If Marilyn's story moved you, challenged you, or made you think, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what this story meant to you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next powerful story. Until then, stay brave, stay honest, and keep believing in the strength of your voice. See you in the next chapter.